Your phone rang at 3 a.m. from the number of someone you buried 15 years ago. Would you answer it? Before you say no, listen to her story. And if you're new here, subscribe, because what you're about to hear will change the way you believe in life, death, and justice forever. My name is Elena Moritz, and 15 years ago, my world ended with a single knock on my door, the kind of knock that splits the soul into before and after. The police officer's eyes had already told me what his mouth didn't need to. My 8-year-old son, Daniel, had been found lifeless in an alley behind St. Vincent's Church, his tiny fingers clenched around the locket I'd given him that morning. They called it a robbery gone wrong. I called it murder, and the day they closed the case, I swore I'd never forgive the world for moving on while my boy lay in the ground. For 15 years I lived like a ghost in the same house, the same streetlight flickering outside his bedroom window, the same whispers of laughter I sometimes thought I still heard on the stairs. But last night at exactly 3 a.m. my phone rang. The screen glowed in the dark, and for a moment I couldn't breathe, because the name flashing on the screen was Daniel Redhart. My son's name. His number. The same one I'd kept saved all these years, unable to delete it, even though the phone it belonged to was buried with him. My heart slammed against my ribs as I picked it up, whispering, "Hello," half expecting silence, half expecting madness. But what came through wasn't either. It was breathing. Slow. Ragged. Then faintly a whisper, my name. "Mom." My knees gave way and I sank to the floor, the phone trembling in my hand as 1,000 memories flashed through me like lightning. It wasn't possible. Couldn't be him. But the voice said something else, something that shattered the 15 years of numbness I'd built like armor. "He's still out there, Mom." That's when I remembered the man they never caught. The one witness who disappeared. The corrupt detective who forced the case closed. I hadn't spoken that name in years, but suddenly it burned on my tongue again. Victor Klein, the man who'd sworn to protect us but betrayed justice for money. My son's voice, or whatever it was, had pulled something buried deep inside me back to life. Rage. For the first time in 15 years, I felt something stronger than grief. I didn't know if I was being haunted or warned, but I knew one thing. I would find out. The next morning I drove to the cemetery. His grave was untouched, the same cracked marble, the same dying flowers. But beside it, half hidden in the grass, was a fresh rose, blood red, wrapped in newspaper. I picked it up and the newspaper clipping made my heart stop. It was an article from the day after Daniel's death, but someone had underlined the headline in red ink. "No suspects in child's murder." And below it, written by hand, were 4 words. "He didn't die alone." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in Daniel's old room, the moonlight painting his toys in ghostly silver, and listened to the silence like it was whispering secrets. At 3 a.m. again my phone buzzed, one new message. It was a photo. Blurry, dark, but I recognized the wallpaper behind the figure in it. It was my house, my living room. The figure was a man, standing in the shadows, holding something small in his hand. I zoomed in. It was Daniel's locket. The one he died clutching. My blood ran cold. I ran downstairs, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears, but the living room was empty. The window, though, was open. The same window I hadn't opened in years. The curtains moved like breath. And on the table lay a single piece of paper, the same red ink, the same handwriting. "You're next." For a moment fear swallowed everything. But then something inside me shifted. I wasn't the same woman who broke 15 years ago. I'd been dead once already. Now I was something else. I went to the closet, opened the box I'd kept hidden behind Daniel's toys. Inside were the old case files, my notes, the evidence the police ignored, everything they told me to forget. I pinned every photo, every report to the wall, until the faces of every man who'd lied, covered up, or turned away stared back at me. And in the center I pinned Victor Klein's photo, older now, according to the last thing I found online, running a private security firm in Chicago. My fingers shook as I traced the letters of his name. "You took everything from me," I whispered. "Now I'm taking everything from you." The next morning I sold my house. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I changed my number except for one thing. I kept Daniel's contacts saved. Every night I looked at it before I slept, waiting for the next call. And when it came, because I knew it would, I'd be ready. I'd find out who called me from my son's grave. Whether it was a ghost, a warning, or justice itself rising from the dirt. Either way, someone was going to pay. 2 days later, I arrived in Chicago, the city where every nightmare I'd buried had quietly been breathing under concrete and neon lights. The wind cut through the streets like blades, cold and merciless, the kind of place where truth froze faster than blood. I rented a room under a false name, Grace Holloway, a name I'd taken from a grave I passed on my way out of town, because the real me had died 15 years ago beside my son's coffin. My first step was finding Victor Klein. I knew he wouldn't remember me. To him, I'd just been another grieving mother, a disposable voice drowned out by corruption and cash. But I remembered every sneer, every lie he told in that courtroom, every evidence lost, every witness missing, every case closed. He ran a company now, Klein Tactical Solutions, a fortress wrapped in barbed wire and tinted glass, hiring ex-cops and mercenaries to protect secrets dressed as security. But ghosts don't need permission to enter locked doors. I spent 3 nights watching from across the street, noting every shift change, every camera angle, every blind spot in his so-called security empire. And on the 4th night, just before 3 a.m., my phone buzzed again. The same number. The same name. Daniel Redhart. This time, I answered before the first ring ended. Silence. Then static, faint, like a storm trapped in metal. And then his voice again, soft but trembling. Mom, he's in the dark room. My breath caught. What room, baby? Where? But all I heard was whispering like multiple voices tangled together, and one distinct sound, a low hum, electrical, mechanical, a generator maybe? I scanned my notes, my photos of the Klein building, and there it was, an unmarked subbasement level that didn't appear on any of the company's public floor plans. My pulse pounded. I waited for the guard's rotation, then moved, slipping through the back lot, my breath clouding in the night. I'd worn black, my hair tucked beneath a hood, every step a heartbeat of vengeance. The keypad by the service entrance was newer, but rage can make you inventive. I'd studied enough of his old cases to guess his passcodes, initials of victims, dates of settlements. The 5th try 0510DK. Daniel's date of death. The door clicked open. I almost smiled. Inside, the building smelled of metal, oil, and rot. The hum from below grew louder as I crept down the stairs. Then I saw it. A heavy steel door with a small glass window, flickering light behind it. I peered through, and for a second my stomach turned to ice. On the wall opposite me were photos, dozens, maybe hundreds, of children. Boys, girls, all ages, pinned like trophies. Some had police tags. Others had clothes stamped across them. And right in the center was Daniel's face, aged digitally to what he'd look like now at 23. My vision blurred with tears, fury trembling my hands. What the hell was this place? I pushed the door open, the metal groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The walls were covered with files, evidence boxes, burner phones. It wasn't just Daniel. It was a network. A machine of silence that had buried dozens of child murder cases under fake paperwork and hush money. Victor had built an empire out of their graves. But then I saw something else. A table in the middle of the room with an old phone, dusty, cracked, the same model as Daniel's. My blood froze. The screen flickered to life by itself, showing one unread voicemail. The timestamp, 15 minutes ago. My hand shook as I pressed play. And there it was, my son's voice again, crying, gasping, calling my name, recorded 15 years ago but sent now. How? Who could have accessed this? My knees gave out, tears streaming down my face, but then I heard another sound, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. The door creaked behind me and I turned slowly. Victor Klein stood there, older, thicker, but the same eyes, cold and hungry for control. You should have left the dead buried, Mrs. Moritz, he said, his voice a snake's hiss. But I suppose some mothers never learn. My fingers tightened around the phone, rage burning through the fear. You killed my son. He smiled. No. I just made sure nobody found out who did. I lunged forward, the years of grief erupting into one violent scream, slamming him into the wall, but he was stronger. He shoved me back, my head cracking against the table edge. The world spun, but I saw something glinting on the floor. His security key card. I snatched it and ran, his footsteps thundering behind me. I stumbled into a side corridor, metal doors flashing by until I found one marked archive. I swiped the card and slipped inside, locking it. The room was cold, rows of filing cabinets stretching into darkness. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it over the drawers, all labeled by case number. Daniel's was there. I opened it and froze. Inside wasn't paper, it was a box. Inside the box was a USB drive and a child's shoe. My son's shoe. I pressed the drive into my phone using an adapter, and the screen lit up with dozens of files. Bank records, police reports, video clips, proof of everything. My heart raced. I had enough to destroy him. But the sound outside reminded me I wasn't safe yet. I slipped out through an emergency exit, the freezing air slapping me awake. I ran through the alley into the night, into the heartbeat of the city that had forgotten us. I didn't stop until I reached the motel, my hands shaking as I backed up every file onto cloud storage. My phone buzzed again, Daniel's number. I whispered, voice trembling. I got him, baby. I got him. But the reply this time wasn't a voice. It was a video file. I opened it and saw something that nearly stopped my heart. It was live footage from inside the Klein building, showing Victor on the floor, blood spreading beneath his body, his own phone ringing beside him. The caller ID read, Daniel Redhart. The camera shook. Someone else was filming, breathing heavily. Then the screen went black. I dropped the phone, staring in horror and disbelief. Who killed him? Who was still inside? And more importantly, who was using my dead son's number? I stared out the window, the city lights flickering like a heartbeat. Maybe this was justice. Maybe this was something darker. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Someone wanted me to see this. Someone was still watching me. And for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. Didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because of the ache that comes when reality feels thinner than air, like one wrong breath could tear it apart. Victor was dead, but not by my hands, and that terrified me more than anything. If not him, then who? The footage of his lifeless body replayed in my mind, the phone beside him still ringing with my son's name flashing across it, as though death itself had called for revenge. By sunrise, I had watched that video 20 times, and every time I noticed something new. A reflection in the glass behind Victor, faint, pale, almost translucent. It looked like a child. I wanted to dismiss it as a trick of light, but my heart wouldn't let me. I packed the few things I had and drove out of the city, my mind unraveling in silence as I replayed Daniel's laughter in my head. Somewhere between exhaustion and despair, I found myself driving toward Willow Creek, the small town where we had lived before everything fell apart. The house was gone, sold, rebuilt, but the church was still there, its steeple cutting the morning sky like an old scar. I parked outside and sat in the car, clutching Daniel's locket in my fist. The last place he had been alive was just beyond that alley behind the church, where the streetlights didn't reach. I stepped out, my breath fogging in the cold, and walked to the spot. The world was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums in your bones. Then faintly my phone buzzed again. The same number. Daniel Redhart. My knees went weak. I answered. Static. Then music. A soft lullaby. My lullaby. The one I used to hum while rocking him to sleep. My eyes filled with tears as I whispered, Daniel, baby, if this is you, please, tell me what you want. The lullaby stopped. Then a whisper so faint it felt like breath against my ear. Look behind the church. My heart stuttered. Slowly I turned. Behind the church, past the crumbling fence, was an old storage shed I didn't remember from before. The door hung half open, the hinges rusted. Every instinct told me to run, but a mother's heart doesn't fear ghosts. It fears only the truth left buried. I stepped inside. Dust swirled in the air and sunlight cut through a crack in the roof, illuminating something on the floor. A small, decayed wooden box. My hands trembled as I knelt and opened it. Inside were children's trinkets, marbles, toy cars, tiny bracelets, things that once belonged to innocence. But at the bottom lay something else, a flash drive, modern, clean, untouched by time. I took it back to my car, plugged it into my phone, and opened the files. They were videos, grainy, time-stamped 15 years ago. My breath caught as I saw Daniel alive, sitting in a dim room, talking to someone off-screen. You said you'd help my mom, he whispered. The voice off camera replied, Of course, Daniel. We just need to keep you safe first. The voice was calm, kind, but it wasn't Victor's. I knew that voice. I froze as recognition hit me like ice in my veins. It was Detective Harris, the man who had handled my son's case, the man who'd stood at my door with pity in his eyes, the man who told me Daniel had been found too late. The truth hit me so hard I almost screamed. He hadn't been killed that night. He'd been taken, hidden, used. My son had died days later, not by accident but by design. I could feel my heart breaking all over again, but this time it came with fire. I watched every second, tears blurring the screen as I pieced it together. Harris and Victor had been partners, part of a trafficking ring that preyed on children from poor families, framing the crimes as random violence. Daniel had seen something he shouldn't have, and when he tried to tell me, they silenced him and covered it up. I dropped the phone, gasping for breath, as rage and grief collided into something dangerous. That's when my phone buzzed again. A message, not a call this time. It read, "He's waiting." Attached was a location, an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of Willow Creek. My whole body trembled. Whoever was sending these messages wanted me to follow. And somehow I already knew who I'd find. The road to the farmhouse was overgrown and silent, the sky bleeding orange as the sun dipped below the trees. The house itself leaned to one side, windows shattered, the past rotting in its bones. I stepped inside, the floorboards moaning beneath my feet, and the smell of decay and rain filled my lungs. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. In the corner of the room stood an old television, its screen cracked but flickering faintly. I moved closer and suddenly it turned on by itself. Static first, then video. Detective Harris, older now, sitting in a chair, staring straight into the camera. "If you're seeing this, Elena," he said, his voice low, almost weary, "then I'm already dead. And if you've come this far, you deserve to know the truth." I froze, barely breathing as his words poured out. He confessed everything: the ring, the bribes, the falsified reports, the children buried in unmarked graves. But then his tone changed. Victor wanted to erase the past, but I couldn't. Daniel, he was different. He forgave me even when I didn't deserve it. He said he'd find a way to tell you the truth. My tears fell silently. Harris looked broken, haunted. When the fire happened, he saved another boy. He died trying to get him out. His phone survived, though. And that's what you've been hearing, Elena. Echoes from a world between worlds. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's just guilt taking form. But you were meant to find this. Finish it. The screen went black. I sank to my knees, clutching my chest, sobbing so hard it hurt. My son had died a hero. Not a victim. Not forgotten. But even as grief tore through me, I felt something else, peace, fleeting but real. I whispered into the silence, "Thank you, baby. I'm so proud of you." And then, as if the universe itself answered, my phone buzzed one last time. No number this time, just a message. "Mom, it's okay now." I covered my mouth, choking on tears, unable to breathe from the weight of love and loss colliding in my chest. I whispered, "I love you, Daniel." And for a brief second I swore I felt warmth, a hand on my shoulder, gentle and familiar. When I opened my eyes, the house was quiet again, the television dead, the air still. The nightmare was ending, but my mission wasn't. There were others. Other children. Other mothers still waiting for their calls. I stood slowly, wiping my tears, and looked around at the ruins of a life built on secrets. Harris had left files here, too, names, dates, locations. Proof that this nightmare stretched far beyond my son. I took everything. I would burn every last thread of their empire. Daniel had given me the truth. Now I would give the world justice, one ghost, one mother, one fight at a time. After Willow Creek, I moved like a woman possessed, my grief tempered into a blade that cut through fear and doubt. The files Harris left me were a map of cruelty. Names, phone numbers, safe houses, bank transfers. Signatures smeared across pages like footprints leading back to men who thought they were untouchable. And every night Daniel's number rang, not to terrify me now, but to guide me, a breadcrumb trail of static and lullabies and the occasional clear, urgent whisper. Left? No, the other left. I learned to listen the way a hunter listens for the snap of a twig, and slowly the ring skeleton came together. Lawyers who laundered money, social workers bribed to look the other way, a charity that funneled funds into silence, a shipping company that moved children like freight. Each revelation made my stomach twist, but it also steeled me. I could do what the law had failed to do, I told myself, but the truth was more complicated. Revenge tasted righteous on nights when sleep slipped through my fingers, but days brought faces. The mothers who'd written letters to an empty house. The fathers who'd hollowed out like trees struck by lightning. And I realized vengeance alone wouldn't heal them. So I forged both paths. One for the courts and one for the scarred souls who'd been denied even that. I started small. Anonymous tips emailed to investigative journalists with encrypted files attached. Bank account screenshots that made auditors sit up in the night. GPS logs that sent 2 federal agents to a warehouse where they found a trove of evidence that made the local news blare headlines. Network of corruption uncovered. I watched the broadcast like a jury foreman, measuring the tremble in my hands, the way a name on a screen could make a man's wife whisper and a child stop crying, and every time the reporters asked who'd leaked the information, I stayed silent and let the truth speak. But truth wasn't always fast. The legal wheels turned slow and oily, and there were men who still walked free because their suits were thicker than the paper indictments. For them, for the men who smiled over coffins and drank to forgotten faces, I became something else. I became the shadow at the edge of their lives. I learned how to move without leaving a scent. Petty thefts turned into larger exposures, a burner phone here, a doctor contractor invoice there. Small things that chipped away at their power, canceled contracts, frozen accounts. Reputations threaded with doubt until even their friends began to look sideways. Some nights I would stand outside a man's house and watch him sleep, imagining the fear I'd breathed into his pillow, and I hated myself for the pleasure that rose in that moment. It felt like drawing breath from the corpse of my own morality. The calls from Daniel changed too, sometimes pleading, sometimes mournful, often encouraging, as if his spirit, whatever veil separated us, wanted me not to become a mirror of those I hunted. One night, curled in a cheap motel bed with the files spread like armor across me, his voice came clear as a bell. "Mom, stop." It was the first time he'd ever told me to stop, and it ripped into me like a hand. I had been close to crossing a line I couldn't step back from. I had planned to leave a man broken in a ditch, to let him know what it felt like to be taken, and Daniel's words saved me from becoming the very monster I'd sworn to destroy. Instead, I found another way that night. I recorded a confession. I'd spent months coaxing a low-level enforcer, a boy named Marco who'd been in over his head, out of the dark with promises of safety and a new life in exchange for truth. He cried as he told me what he'd done, how they'd rationalized children as collateral, how they'd fed each other lies until they believed their own. I fed his testimony to the right reporter, then to the authorities with a lawyer's touch, and watched as indictments rolled out like thunder. The men I'd once only cursed now felt legally naked, their private fortresses breached by paper. Yet even as courts convened and handcuffs clinked under fluorescent lights, the supernatural signs intensified, as if Daniel's presence grew stronger where justice advanced. A child's laugh on an empty street, the scent of fresh-cut grass in a winter alley, his favorite toy appearing on the passenger seat of my car with a note that said only, "Proud." Once, in the middle of a derelict playground where I'd met a woman whose daughter had disappeared the same year as mine, a swing began to move although no wind stirred, and for a heartbeat we both watched it, breath held, feeling a kind of benediction. These moments nourished me and haunted me. They were proof that I hadn't built a crusade alone. But there were darker signs too. Threats slipped under motel doors, a man in a gray hat following me for 3 blocks, a dusk phone call where a voice I once loved said, "Finish this and you'll lose yourself." Those warnings should have made me retreat. Instead they tightened my resolve. I moved to the next target. Eleanor Voss, the charity director who'd laundered donations, smiling at galas while children went missing. She was an easy one, comfortable in her cruelty, thinking that kindness as PR could absolve sin. I infiltrated her world with the skill of someone who had nothing left to lose, sat at her table at a fundraiser where crystal glasses chimed, and listened as she joked about misplaced assets, while her assistant laughed nervously. That night, back in my cheap room, I compiled her bank statements into a mosaic that left no room for plausible deniability, and the next morning, a headline exposed her as a thief of orphan futures. She lost everything, her donors, her license, her composure, and I watched images of her reduced to the sliver of a woman who had once used other people's sorrow as currency. I felt nothing the way I once thought I would. Instead, there was only a hollow ache and a sliver of relief. But justice served in public was only part of my aim. There were men who couldn't be touched by law, men with political friends, with shell companies and apologies bought by linguists. For them I planned differently. I used their own weapons against them. Pride, fear, control. I lured a senator into a meeting with fabricated evidence of bribery, and recorded his confession when he thought no one listened. I sent anonymous packages containing the names of the children his office had quietly ignored. I flooded his inbox with the photographs of the graves we'd found. Watching a man with a polished smile crumble under the weight of simple truth felt like watching a dam burst open. And I hoped each collapse would make the world safer by mere inches. But the deeper I dug, the more I found that the roots of this evil had entwined into places I loved. A pastor who'd taken cash to sign paperwork, a school board member who'd looked the other way, a social worker who'd been blackmailed into silence. Every revelation knocked the floor from beneath me. Every confession made me realize that the rot was structural, not merely individual. And yet, as the legal cases multiplied and as the public grew angrier, there were nights when the calls stopped altogether for days and I felt, absurdly, abandoned. Then, just when I was on the brink of exhaustion, the world gave me a sign that would change everything. I was on a stakeout outside a warehouse where I'd been told a shipment of documents would arrive, huddled in my car with a thermos of coffee gone cold, when a snowflake, the first of the season, landed on my hand. It melted instantly, but beneath it was a small white feather, impossibly spotless against the grime. I turned it over. It had a smear of red on the tip, not blood but paint, the exact same red that had been used to underline that old newspaper clipping on Daniel's grave. I stared at that feather until my eyes blurred, and then my phone buzzed. "Find the river," it said. No number. No voice. Just those two words. The river ran near the industrial district where children had once played. A slow black ribbon of water that cut through the city like a wound. I went there at dusk, boots sinking into mud, and there I found an abandoned boathouse with a trapdoor in the floor. Inside, in a space no one had looked, were crates full of evidence. Photographs, ledgers, even videotapes used to blackmail families into silence. The feathers were everywhere, like a breadcrumb trail. Someone had been collecting them, arranging them into small piles by case, almost reverently. I sat on the floor among the crates and laughed, a shaky, raw sound that surprised me with how much relief it carried. The prints on the boxes led to an address, a name I recognized not from the files but from the nursery where Daniel used to go. Mason Cole, a handyman who had fixed our fence when Daniel was small. I thought of the man who always had a kind word, who fixed things without asking for payment. The notion that he could be part of this made my head swim. I followed the trail carefully, and when I cornered him in a rundown bungalow with paint peeling like old scabs, he didn't fight. He opened the door and let me in as if he had been waiting for someone to finally come. The room smelled of oil and sawdust. On a wall hung photographs of children, but not like trophies. They were labeled with dates, initials, and little notes. Saved 11/12. Trusted 6/05. Mason looked at me with tired eyes and without prompting began to speak. He told me he'd been repairing things for the ring, coaxed into doing maintenance on properties where children were held, but when he saw what they did, he'd begun to steal evidence, leave feathers as markers for mothers still searching, bury clues in places he knew someone brave might look. He'd been the one leaving toys on my passenger seat, the one who'd slipped the flash drives into church boxes, the one who'd recorded small snippets of voices into tapes he'd hidden inside hollow dolls. "Your boy saved another kid," he said hoarsely, and pointed to a faded photo on the table. The other boy, grown now, smiling shyly. Mason's hand shook as he pushed a shoebox toward me. Inside were dozens of feathers, bundles of documents, and a small photograph of my son, older, standing by a river with a grin that made my chest ache. "We owed them more than silence," Mason whispered. "We owed them justice." In that moment, with the weight of years pressing down and the flutter of a child's unseen presence in the room like a benediction, I understood something essential. Revenge was a private weather, but justice was a storm you could call down on an entire city if you had the courage to blow the whistle. I had both the storm and the whistle now. The call from Daniel came that night, softer than ever. "Finish, Mom." I felt his hand in the feather in my palm, and though my heart still bled, it beat with a purpose that was not just mine. The final phase was coming. I had the evidence, the witnesses, and an army of mothers who now spoke with the strength of a single voice. What remained was the hardest part, to strike in a way that honored what Daniel had been, brave, forgiving, and unbroken, and to ensure that when the last man fell, he fell under the law with the world watching, so that no one else could bury another child with a polite shrug and a cash settlement.